With all the luxuries and conveniences we can enjoy in our lives today, it's so hard to imagine that there used to be a time when even the concept of indoor plumbing didn't exist yet. We're talking about the medieval era, when most of what gives life our daily comforts were inexistent. So what existed instead during this medieval era? Often referred to as the Middle Ages or the Dark Ages, the medieval era was a period in history that spanned more or less around 1,000 years, starting from 476 AD until the year 1450. When the period medieval times is mentioned, what mostly comes to people's minds are castles and the Crusades. But the medieval era is so much more than Hollywood stereotypes of flame-throwing dragons and dark dungeons. And that's what we're all going to explore today. So buckle up, because we're about to bring medieval era history back to life. Hello and welcome to History of Life, where we relive history's greatest moments and the eras in between. Today we're dialing it back more than a millennia ago to revisit and see for ourselves what was life like in the medieval times. If you'd like to see more fascinating facts, make sure to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit that notification bell. We love having you around, so thanks for checking us out. The medieval era was a period in world history that really shifted civilization. Before the dawn of the Middle Ages, Europe was living through the Roman Empire for what seemed like an eternity. This period that began in 27 BC was a vast political and cultural entity centered around ancient Rome, which spread to the Mediterranean and eventually to large parts of Europe and to the Middle East. The Roman Empire was a time that heralded in military prowess, expansive infrastructure, and enduring influence on governance and language. It shaped the course of Western civilization for many centuries, until it finally met its demise in 476 AD. A new age ascended, and this was the medieval era. Many past historians and scholars speculate the reason why the medieval era was referred to as the Middle or Dark Ages was because no grandiose advancements were made in this time. Compared to the great scientific accomplishments and colossal art productions of the classical ages prior, the medieval era didn't create anything extraordinary. Modern historians, however, pinpoint that while certain regions and periods within the medieval era experienced economic and political instability, there were still some significant advancements in architecture, art, and literature. The medieval ages also underwent major historical and cultural shifts through the Crusades, the Black Plague, the Magna Carta, and the Hundred Years' War. When the tide of the Middle Ages washed over Europe in 476 AD, a vital transition took place in terms of power and religion. The medieval era was now characterized by feudalism and decentralized governance, and Christianity dominating all over Western Europe. This political fragmentation also created a new structure of society that clearly defined the upper, middle, and lower classes within the feudal system. The feudal setup meant that the king was ruler above all. Surrounding him in the upper class were nobility, decorated knights, and clergymen like the bishops. Those in the middle class comprised the merchants, craftsmen, and soldiers who were living comfortably but didn't have their own estates. Those in the lower class were the peasants and serfs of those who didn't own any land or real property. The king would grant fiefs or large pieces of land to the nobility and to the clergy to administer, and then it would be the serfs who would till and work on the land. In return for planting and harvesting the crops, the noblemen allowed the serfs to live on the estate, and they would also get a share of the harvested crops. Not only that, they were also given protection by the soldiers in the event of enemy invasion. The clergymen, meanwhile, provided spiritual guidance to the rest of society through the sacraments and facilitating of holy days and feast days. Apart from owning land, the upper class had more valuable privileges too. This included the freedom to travel wherever and whenever they wanted to, as well as having access to education and other benefits. The nobles and clerics also had serfs who did all the manual labor for them, from preparing their meals to maintaining their household. Knights were also highly favored in this time, as they accorded security and protection for everyone, granting them access to the perks of upper-class life. As for the middle class, they also got to enjoy certain privileges, but these were also subject to approval by the noblemen first, like when and where they could travel. At the height of the medieval era, the middle class was not that large a population yet. Those who comprised the middle class were mostly tradesmen, merchants, and other artisans with little to no education but had a lot of technical expertise to offer. They did not own land, but their specific skills afforded them freedom to live in an estate without needing to work on the land itself. Towards the end of the medieval period, however, the middle class would soon rise to become a driving force that altered the course of history forever. In essence, the true backbone of the medieval ages belonged to its largest population, the lower class. It's unfortunate, though, that they were also the least privileged class. To be in the lower class meant becoming a peasant. Peasants mostly lived in the villages within the estates or manors owned by the noblemen and lords. Their lives centered around the village, from their birth till adulthood and unto their death. Those in the higher tier of the peasants' hierarchy were the serfs, or those who owed a lifelong fealty to their lords. Unlike slaves, serfs were only bound to their lords through the land they lived in, and were not considered as the lord's property. They were given access to live in the lord's estate through agriculture, wherein they were expected to farm the land by planting crops such as wheat and barley, and vegetables such as carrots and parsnips. There was also much work to be done grazing sheep for wool or cows for milk and cheese. Whatever the serfs would harvest and produce, the bulk of it would go to their lords as payment for rent on the land, but they also got to keep some for their own consumption. When it came to what they could do with their status, serfs needed to have explicit permission from their lords to be able to marry another and to be able to travel outside of the estate. Other than their restricted movements, serfs also faced a host of other challenges and difficulties, like back-breaking manual labor, food shortages in times of droughts, and worse, plagues and other illnesses. The medieval age was not particularly kind to the lower class, but they were the ones who really made the biggest impact in this era. Feeling illuminated yet from all these scholarly insights into what life was like during the medieval times? What's a new learning you gained here that has helped you understand this period better? Just stay in your seats and keep watching as our exploration into medieval life is about to get even more compelling. If you are enjoying this video, we hope you can hit that like button and subscribe to our channel so we can share more captivating history tidbits to you. In the Middle Ages, trade and commerce revolved around the sprouting medieval villages and cities all across Western Europe. This was spurred on due to the revival of some key trade routes, which allowed for the barter of goods over long distances. So naturally, the towns that were passable nearby these trade routes greatly benefited from all the activities brought on by merchants and craftsmen. A good example of this would be the thriving towns along the river routes like the Rhine or the Danube. Another thing that sprouted during the medieval times were guilds, or associations of craftsmen and merchants engaged in the same trade. These guilds were created as a way for the craftsmen and merchants to unite to protect their common interests. Aside from medieval towns and cities, castles were also a fundamental unit where the people lived and gathered. Castles primarily served as a seat of power and governance for the nobles, while also as a defensive stronghold held by the knights and soldiers. The castle was the main residence for the nobleman lording over the medieval estate, and it was common for his family and extended family to live with him. In order to meet all the needs and demands of the residing nobility, hundreds of servants also lived in the castles, oftentimes bringing their own families with them. These staff members included cooks, chambermaids, butlers, stable hands, blacksmiths, and guards. It was common for castle staff to prepare large banquets, as there were so many mouths to feed in just one castle alone. Perhaps Hollywood's depiction of long tables filled with platters of food and pitchers of ale during castle mealtimes are accurate after all. But to curb the debauchery and to ensure the religious ceremonies could carry on day by day, each castle also had assigned clergymen living in the premises. In fact, other than the great hall where meals were taken, the on-site chapel inside the castle was one of its most defining structures. Life in the medieval castle was far from ideal, considering that it often became a cesspool of diseases due to its unsanitary conditions, cramped spaces, and lack of sunlight. And considering there was no indoor plumbing that time, you can just imagine where the wastes went. Or maybe you'd rather not. But it goes without saying that life during the Middle Ages wasn't all that terrible. Despite not having full rights, serfs and peasants were still free to partake in festivities and sporting activities in the villages. Due to the widespread Catholicism at the time, many celebrations revolved around religious feasts and other holy days. While the high holy days like Good Friday were kept solemn, the more jovial feasts like Easter were celebrated with great pomp, often lasting several days. Villages would come together to partake in elaborate rituals, feasting on rich foods and wine, and enjoying music, dancing, and theatrical performances. More than the merrymaking, these religious celebrations served as opportunities for social bonding and communal solidarity within the tightly knit medieval villages. Something noteworthy mentioning is that in this period, salt became a highly prized commodity due to its crucial role in the preservation of food. Salt was very valuable, but it was rather scarce, which led to the establishment of lucrative salt trade routes and the construction of salt mines across Europe. The control over salt production and distribution often became a source of power for medieval nobles and merchant guilds, shaping economic and political dynamics in the region. Today, we hardly think of salt as anything other than a seasoning, but in the Middle Ages, salt would often be the sole cause for conflicts and wars. Another thing that needs to be addressed about the medieval period that often gets misconstrued is how this era didn't yield any significant advancements, thus earning the term the Dark Ages. On the contrary, the medieval period saw several significant advancements across various fields. In architecture, it gave rise to magnificent Gothic cathedrals that were identified by its stylistic soaring vaults, pointed arches, and intricate stained glass windows. This era also witnessed substantial strides in agriculture, with innovations such as the three-field system and the widespread use of the heavy plow. These strides helped lead farming serfs with increased agricultural productivity and population growth. Additionally, developments in metallurgy and manufacturing techniques helped propel the growth of trade and commerce, which eventually laid the cornerstones for the economic expansion and artistic accomplishments that were brought forth in the Renaissance period. Yet, it's still important that we do acknowledge all the difficulties and problems that came with the Middle Ages. Images of the bubonic plague often come to mind whenever the Middle Ages is mentioned, considering that this outbreak almost decimated populations across Europe. The bubonic plague was caused by bacteria found in fleas that infected rats, and owing to extremely unsanitary conditions in castles and merchant ships, it easily spread from rats to humans. The devastating effects of the bubonic plague was so horrible that it became to be known as the Black Death, as those who died from it would show visible blackened tissue from gangrene. An estimated 25 to 30 million people died from the bubonic plague, causing widespread social, economic, and religious uprisings throughout Europe and even to some parts of Asia. Another major challenge in the medieval period was the power imbalance brought about by feudalism. Due to its top-down system of land ownership and obligations, the middle and lower classes often revolted against the nobility to protest such unfair systems. Adding to the tensions were the religious crusades, which fueled further conflicts beyond the borders of the estates and countries. And while there were some hallmark innovations in the era, compared to the previous classical ages of the Greek and Roman empires, the Middle Ages advancements were a bit scant. Because of how medieval society was set up, it led to technological stagnation and limited access to education for a majority of the population. Since only a privileged few could study and partake of educational activities, creativity and learning were stunted, leading to the hindrance for scientific and intellectual progress. But with the Dark Ages, an illuminating period soon broke out with the Renaissance, which encouraged academic knowledge, honing of artistic skills, intellectual discussions, and broad new ideas. Towards the end of the medieval period, dramatic transformations occurred, like the decline of feudalism due to upheavals from the lower class looking to unseat their overlords. As feudalism faded away, centralized monarchies gave rise to a new system, which also brought forth with it the growth of more commercial urban centers. While it is quite glaring that life in the medieval times were filled with problems, challenges, and many inconveniences, it still left an enduring legacy that continues to influence modern society. Can you ever imagine what it would be like for you to live in medieval times? While it's hard for us to imagine it ourselves, what we do want to undertake is to look back on our roots and acknowledge all that have been done by those who have come before us. The people who lived in the Middle Ages, especially the middle and lower classes who had limited control over their lives, endured so much toil and hardship to provide for everyone's basic needs, making them worthy of our recognition and praise. Thank you for watching History of Life. We hope this exploration into what life was like in the Middle Ages helped you understand how our modern society came to be. Like this video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos like this. And don't forget to hit that notification bell to know when the next one comes out. See you in the next video.